Peace. This your host, Selah, Shalom, and this is the Cosmon Teachings in the words of Jehovah and his angel ambassadors from the Cosmon Bible Owaspi. And the topic of discussion today is called the submerged continent of Pan, also known as Pangaea, Lemuria, and Mu. The continent of Pan was the continent that existed in the Pacific Ocean and was submerged 25,000 years ago during the Earth's travel in the 17th ark cycle after the creation of mortals called the Ark of Noah. And the continent was sunk under the authority of the Creator through his high-raised Etherian god Aph and his ambassadors during the Earth's travel in the 17th ark cycle. The word Pan in the English dictionary means entire, all, everyone. Now the continent of Pan is what scholars refer to as Pangaea, and the name Pangaea is derived from the ancient Greek Pan, meaning entire, and Gaia, meaning earth. So Pangaea means entire earth. But the difference with their concept is that Pangaea was when all the continents were one landmass, and this is their concept of Pangaea. But Pangaea was not when all the continents were one, but was one large landmass located in the Pacific Ocean. This continent was called Pan in Owaspi, and must have been what modern scholars call Pangaea. Others call it Lemuria and Mu. There is no recorded mortal history where mortals spoke of the continents being all connected. So the splitting of continents must have taken place before mortals' creation. This would make more sense, being that there is no recorded human history where it stated all continents were connected as one. So when mortals were created, they were created on each of the land masses already divided up. Now the discovery of this landmass in the Pacific would be rediscovered in the Cosmon era, which is our present time, as stated in Owaspi, the Lord's first book, chapter 2, verse 12, where it states, "So also will I, the Lord, provide in the Cosmon era to discover the sunken land of Pan, that mortals may comprehend the magnitude of the work of the Lord. And it has been revealed that there was a landmass in the Pacific with underwater monuments to prove its existence during the 1990s. Now, the Pan language. The first language was symbols of all things on earth and in heaven. This system of writing was originated in Pan, then migrated to other parts of the world. As stated in the Lord's third book, chapter 1, verse 10, where it states, verse 10, God said, "This shall be called the Panic language, because it is made of earthly images, and in after ages, whosoever desires to find the first written words of man shall have recourse to the pictures of all things on earth, and in the waters, and in the air above the earth." So the oldest form of language is pictorial form. Now in the first book of the First Lords, chapter 4, verse 1, it states, "About this time man began to use his lips and tongue in enunciating words, prior to which he spoke in the thorax." And this verse is referring to mortals' earlier days on earth. And you could see this same concept with an infant child. The infant utters from the thorax when it begins to express sound, before beginning to utter from its lips and tongue in enunciating words. So the early races of mortals went through the same process of development when it came to learning language. It was a time where mortals expressed the same expression that a child or infant would before it learns to speak. At one point, the mortal race was like that in its early development and stages. Now, in the book of Selah, entitled Pan, the primitive tongue, missing script from Owaspi, verse 1, Pan said, "I am the earth, the first inhabitable place for man. I am beneath the water, being submerged. My name survives. My words are man's first words. On the continent of Pan were words first used by man." So this verse states that Pan was the first for developing language and the first inhabitable place for man. And again, the modern word for Pan means all, everyone, entire, referring to the origin of Pan being the first. Verse 2, "I am the Ah, signifying earth. I am earthwards. I am the dispersed language. From me, Pan, came all earth languages. In all nations I am found. I deliver up. By me shall man know him who sent me. By his angels I was given to mortals, by them brought forth in this day. Again, the Pan language was a language of pictorial glyphs like the Egyptian hieroglyphs and the Chinese and Japanese glyphs. These are remnants of the Pan language. Now, Japan and the origin of its name. Now in the Lord's first book, chapter 1, verse 55, it states, verse 55, the fleet of two ships, and this is referring to the time of the flood. The fleet of two ships carried to the north was named Yesta, which in the Waga tongue, Waga meaning Pan, and the term Waga is the name of the first Lord God that ruled over Pan, and I'll explain that later, which in the Waga tongue was Zapan, which is the same country that is to this day called Japan, signifying relic of the continent of Pan, for it lay to the north where the land was cleaved in twine. So here in Owaspi it states that Japan is a surviving piece of the continent of Pan, and the Japanese are referred to as the relics of the continent of Pan. Now, the English word for Japan derives from the Chinese pronunciation of the Japanese name pronounced Nippon. Nippon means sun origin and are often translated as land of the rising sun. Now, the continent of Pan, being that Japan is a surviving piece of that continent, it would have been the land of the rising sun, because it would be the first continent to behold the rising sun, and then Asia, India, Africa, and then across to America. So Pan is the first, and America is the last in the rising and setting of the sun in its daily course. Now, the English word for Japan came to the west during early trade routes. The early Mandarin, or possibly Wu Chinese pronunciation of Japan was recorded by Marco Polo as Sipangu. And here you can see the term Pan in the word Sipangu, also referring to the continent of Pan, showing in the Japanese language they retain the name Pan. Shanghainese, a Wu dialect, the pronunciation of characters Japan is Zipan, and this version of Zipan can be seen in Owaspi in the Lord's first book, chapter 1, verse 55, mentioned earlier, where it states, the fleets of two ships carried to the north was named Yesta, which in the Waga tongue was called Zapan. So here in Owaspi you can see how they wrote Zapan, the same as Zapan, ascribed by the Shanghainese Awu dialect. The Portuguese traders were the first to bring the word Japan to Europe. It was first recorded in English in a 1565 letter spelled Gaia Pan. So here the first recorded name for Japan in English being in 1565 present time was Gaia Pan, and Gaia was a name given to the earth as mother. So Mother Pan can be a name referring to the mother continent Pan. The same way we say Mother Africa, now you have Gaia Pan, Mother Pan. And notice every Pan movement carries the name Pan before the continent, such as Pan-African, Pan-American, Pan-Iranian, Pan-Asian, and so on. All these Pan movements carry the name Pan before their country, and we already discovered that the meaning of Pan means all, everyone, entire, referring to the continent of Pan being the first inhabitable place for mortals, being the place where mortals first used words. So Pan is the first. So now I just showed you how Pan has roots, indigenous roots, in the Japanese language, along with the Chinese, and any other language at that. In Owaspi, it refers to the submerged continent as Pan, but there are many who call this continent Lemuria and Mu. So here's the origin of the name Lemuria and Mu. In 1864, the zoologist and biogeographer Philip Sclater wrote an article on the mammals of Madagascar in the Quarterly Journal of Science, using a classification he referred to as lemurs. Philip proposed that Madagascar and India had once been part of a large continent. He wrote, the anomalies of the mammal, fauna, of Madagascar can best be explained by supposing that a large continent occupied parts of the Atlantic and Indian Ocean, that this continent was broken up into islands, of which some have become amalgamated with Africa, some with what is now Asia, and that in Madagascar, and the Mascarene Islands, we have existing relics of this great continent, for which I should propose the name Lemuria. So the name Lemuria came from Philip Sclater in 1864, where he proposed that name for a missing continent, which he also referred to as being in the Atlantic and Indian Ocean, and not the Pacific. So all those who call on the name Lemuria, it only goes back to the year 1864, when the name was created. Now, let's go into the origin of the name Mu. Now, Charles Brazour, who in 1864, the same year Lemuria was created, mistranslated what was then called the Troano Codex using the Delanda alphabet. Charles believed that a word that he read as Mu referred to a land submerged by a catastrophe. Lee Plangion then identified this lost land with Atlantis and turned it into a continent which had supposedly sunk into the Atlantic Ocean. So here the name Mu came about by Charles Brazour in 1864, the same year Lemuria was created, and was considered a mistranslation from the Troano Codex and using the Delanda alphabet, and he also believed Mu to be in the Atlantic Ocean. So all those who call on Mu, that name only goes back to 1864. So Pan has more indigenous roots to that continent submerged in the Pacific than to say Lemuria or Mu. Now Mu, as a lost Pacific Ocean continent, was later popularized by James Churchward in a series of books beginning with Lost Continent of Mu, The Motherland of Man, published in 1926, re-edited later as The Lost Continent of Mu in 1931. Other popular books in the series are The Children of Mu, 1931, and The Sacred Symbols of Mu, 1933. So in 1926, Churchward mentioned that this continent was located in the Pacific. But before this, in 1881, Owaspi reveals that it was in the Pacific before Churchward. And when Owaspi in 1881 spoke of it being in the Pacific, at the same time, Lemuria and Mu was believed to be in the Atlantic, showing you the validity of the Owaspi. Churchward claimed that more than 50 years ago, while he was a soldier in India, he befriended a high-ranking temple priest who showed him a set of ancient sunburnt clay tablets, supposedly in a long-lost Naga Maya language, which only 2 other people in India could read. Having mastered the language himself, Churchward found out that they originated from the place where man first appeared, Mu. So here Churchward, when he went up into the hills of India, came across a priest who showed him some scrolls referring to a landmass, but they didn't call it Mu. Keep in mind, Churchward created the word Mu, but the high priest in the Indian temples referred to that landmass as being where mortals first originated. And as I read earlier in the Owaspi, that Pan was the first inhabitable place for mortals, showing you correlations in that aspect. Now, Churchward claimed that the landmass of Mu was located in the Pacific Ocean and stretched east and west from the Moranians to Easter Island, and north to south from Hawaii to Mangaya. He claimed that according to the creation myth he read in the Indian tablets, Mu had been lifted above sea level by the expansion of underground volcanic gases. Eventually, Mu was completely obliterated in almost a single night after a series of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The broken land fell into that great abyss of fire and was covered by 50 millions of square miles of water. And this event that they're describing was the flood in the Ark of Noah, or the sinking of Pan, which is mentioned in the Bible as the flood. But the Bible doesn't tell you that it was a landmass that was sunk, which brought about the flood. So here Churchward was the one in 1926 who referred to Mu being in the Pacific Ocean, although Owaspi spoke of it being in the Pacific since 1881. So both the terms Lemuria and Mu only goes back to the year 1864. And there's a misrepresentation of a missing continent that Owaspi correctly identify as Pan. The word Pan has more indigenous roots than both Lemuria and Mu. So Owaspi referring to the continent as Pan shows validity and truth compared to calling it Lemuria and Mu, which came about by speculation. And with that, I'd like to say peace and blessings and catch you on the next documentary called The Flood and Sinking of Pan in the Ark of Noah. Shalom.